Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So, I know all the regulars to the channel are probably looking at this one going, oh boy, here we go again. Nate's about to trash on Navy SEALs, right? That's not the purpose of this video, okay? In reality, the purpose of this video is because I get, at this point, the channel's big enough, hundreds of messages from young men that are about to step off and are looking to try to go special operations in all sorts of different capacities and wonder which unit is right for them, okay? So this is not to necessarily trash on the SEALs. This is to look at things objectively to help you understand what you're sort of getting yourself into depending on which unit you may choose, all right? Now, for those of you who seem to think, you know, I have something against SEALs, right? I don't. In fact, my three favorite special operator influencers by far are all Navy SEALs, okay? And that's Sean Ryan on the Sean Ryan podcast. I love his podcast. Chad Wright over at the 37 Project, one of my favorites. And then DJ Shipley. Love all three of these dudes. Awesome representation of what it means to be special operator, okay? So this isn't to be anti-SEAL, it's to be pro-reality, okay? Because in the land of Hollywood and Navy SEALs, sometimes there's a lack thereof, okay? Now, the reason what spurred on this idea for this video was a clip I saw from everybody's favorite former CIA operative that I thought was actually super interesting, okay? So the first thing we're gonna do, roll that clip, and then we're gonna talk about it and discuss my feelings about it through the video. So first things first, let's check it out.
And I honestly, I know I'm going to piss a lot of SEALs off because there are a lot of SEAls.
Right.
Just think about that, right? There's like 6 different teams. All of them have hundreds of different SEAls. Like there's a lot of SEAls out there. And they're when you talk to them, if you've talked to them, if you haven't talked to them, you should 100% invite them on your show. It doesn't take long talking to a SEAL before you realize that they are just a highly trained human weapon.
Right.
There's not a lot of depth to them.
Right.
But when you get to like a Green Beret or a Delta trained operative, you're talking to a smart person.
Right.
So scary because you realize for as smart and as kind as they seem, they're also lethal.
Right.
Right. And you start to get a humbling understanding of why we are the best, most powerful military in the world.
All right, so what Andrew says here, I actually think is really interesting, okay? I've seen a ton of different dudes sort of say the same thing in a lot of different ways, okay? And really what he's getting at here is sort of the linear scope of what a Navy SEAL actually is from a operational standpoint, okay? Like he says, they're basically a human weapon, not a lot of depth to them. I think that's a little bit harsh, okay? I know quite a few SEALs, and I know some really smart dudes, and I don't think that's necessarily true across the board. However, there's kind of that is kind of a theme with some of them. We all know who they are in the public space, that it kind of does seem that way, kind of just knucklehead, Navy SEAL, warmongering type of behavior, okay? It is what it is. I don't think they're all that way, but I do want to talk about sort of like he brings up the comparison with Green Berets, right? And how, you got a really smart individual on top of the lethal capability. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we're going to talk about sort of the differences all the way from the selection of the Q courses through operationally, through fuck ups, okay, operationally, and some things with culture that we'll get into that I think sort of separate the two. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, talk about the difference in selecting a SEAL comparatively to, let's say, Green Berets or Delta Force. All right, so the selection process, the way it works, SEALs is actually a little bit interesting because I'm not sure if the SEALs consider BUDS a selection process or a qualification course or both, okay? Because most selection processes, SF, 19, 21 days, Delta, 28 days, roughly. Ranger Battalion, 8 weeks, I guess you could say. Whereas SEALs, BUDS, 6 months long. Sort of considered that entire thing as their selection process. Really long, brutal, just to be selected. However, once you're selected, then you only have a 6-month Q course phase in SQT where you sort of get more tactical training. Okay, so I kind of look at it all as like kind of one seamless selection Q course. Okay, so about a 12-month Q course process. Comparatively to Green Berets, right, you're looking at typically a minimum of 2 years, and that's for an 18 Echo, Bravo, Charlie, language school, the whole process, selection, and everything. 18 Deltas is going to be 3+ years. Okay, so obviously 2 to 3 times the amount of training goes into becoming a Green Beret before or comparatively to a Navy SEAL. Why is that important when we talk about sort of a linear scope of duty and responsibility? Well, when you get 3 times as much training, right, you're probably going to have a much more expansive mission set, let's say, which SF has the most wide-reaching mission set. We'll get to that a little bit later, okay? Another big difference is the demographic that we're pulling from, okay? So SEALs, a much, much younger force comparatively to Special Forces, okay? The average age of a Navy SEAL is about 26 years old. The average age of a Green Beret is about 33 years old, okay? What are the differences there? Maturity, right? Experience, all those sorts of things. Probably former military experience, and a big part of this, I tell people, you got to understand, the Army, Green Berets, Delta Force especially, draws from, other than the 18 X-ray program, right? Extensive sort of combat arms, for the most part, background soldiers. Okay, so SF is drawing from the 82nd Airborne, the 101st, all these different infantry units, now not exclusively, but ton of knowledge and expertise to draw from to bring to the regiment. Delta Force, that's even more elevated, right? They are literally just taking the best of the best from SF, Ranger Battalion, and across the entire military, okay? So whereas SEALs are drawing from the civilian world, and if you were to come straight from the Navy didn't have an infantry. Technically, you could say the Marine Corps, right? But Marine Corps is probably going to go MARSOC if they're going to go Special Operations. So not a lot to draw from there, okay? So that's another reason why sort of you have a linear sort of, and I would say low elevated, low ceiling ability to the unit as a whole, comparatively to something like SF. Again, not to trash on it, this is just realities of sort of the data with that. Again, what do you learn in these qualification courses? Because that's important too, right? What you're trained on is going to obviously determine your capabilities and your mission set. Well, in the SEALs, they're mainly training, dive, underwater operations, and land warfare. Okay, those are the big 3. Okay, so you're gonna learn how to do dive, BDS, boat operations, and then also obviously infantry style-esque combat. Okay, so that's kind of, again, very sort of linear in its scope of duty. Whereas in SF, right, in the qualification course, you're gonna learn a ton of things, right? Unconventional warfare, heavy focus. You're gonna learn squad unit tactics, infantry-based things as well. You're also gonna learn a highly capable MOS, right? An 18 Echo, a radio communicator at an extremely high level. 18 Delta, medic, extremely high level, okay? Engineer, weapons sergeant, everything is, again, for our MOS phase, 4 months of just our personal MOS team duty is almost the entire length of SQT, all right? And then you're also gonna do unconventional warfare, huge exercises like Robin Sage, okay? Not only that, you're gonna learn a foreign language. You're gonna 6 months of a foreign language, okay? So it's way more education and training that goes into building a Green Beret, which, like Andrew said, when you look at the difference, you have a really smart operator that can do a lot of things. Well, yeah, but there's also a ton more that is put into training Green Berets and Delta Force operators than a SEAL. Okay, so it's not a knock, it's just that's the reality of how those courses actually pan out. Okay, so let's talk about operationally. All right, what have SEALs, and we're going to go, let's say, Global War on Terror-esque time frame, because I've done videos on like this, and I've heard, oh, well, back in Vietnam. Okay, well, none of the units are like the same thing they were back in Vietnam, including SF. Okay, so we're gonna stick with what's sort of recent and relevant in that way. Now, Global War on Terror, what were the SEALs used for primarily? Elevated infantry tasks in Iraq. Obviously, a lot of action for the SEALs in early Iraq. We've seen the movies, right? Chris Kyle in American Sniper and all those movies, right? And then some use in Afghanistan, which we'll talk about later, got cut pretty short pretty fast due to some huge fuck-ups, Operation Red Wings, things like that. Okay? And then really where you've actually seen The most success, I think, for the SEALs comparatively to all the other SOF units has been in sort of anti-piracy and work in Africa, okay, which kind of makes sense. Doing boat operations, things like that. That is what that unit is really for. And so in fairness to the SEALs, when you use them as the tool, the tool for the job they're actually intended for, they're very, very good at it, okay? But much like even SF, okay, and Ranger Battalion, all of us, Global War on Terror sort of shoved us all into being direct action units when we're not all necessarily designed for that, okay? So it's kind of like a lot of the times you were just using the wrong tool for the job, and that's really not fair to criticize the SEALs for, because again, right, if you want to send a unit in to Ramadi or Fallujah or something like that, would you rather have a unit of SEALs or a unit of Ranger Battalion? Obviously Ranger Battalion, okay? That is more curtailed to what they're good at and what they're designed for. This is not a Ranger Battalion video. I'll do another one on that later. I know there's a lot of other things, airfield seizures, everything they're good at, okay? But from a strictly tactical point target raid, who do I want to bring? If I want to do that, not even Green Berets, right? With a bunch of Afghans, no, I want to bring Ranger Battalion to just smash that place to bits, okay? That's reality. So use the right tool for the job. Now, comparatively to SF operationally over the last 20 years, oh my God, SF is the most deployed, the most used, the most effective, and it's not even close, when wide scale across the globe unit the United States military has. Okay, we're in upwards of 90 plus countries always, right? Constantly working with, developing our relationships, our alliances with foreign nation militaries in preparation for conflicts to come. Okay, that's a huge deal of what we do. And that's on top of all of the things in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, okay, that Special Forces ODAs have done. And when we talk about Afghanistan, okay, the vast majority of Afghanistan from start to finish was done by Army Special Forces, okay? When we're talking about owning the entire country, doing VSO, actually counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, with obviously a lot of help from sort of surgical strike type things from Ranger Battalion, Delta Force, but as a whole, that was really our conflict in SF, okay? But we also were doing counterterrorism in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the Philippines, Northern Horn of Africa, okay? So, and counterinsurgency in all those places as well, okay? So, also direct action. We were being used a ton for, this is like one of our 8 mission sets, okay? And all of these different things are actually part of the Special Forces core mission set: direct action, foreign internal defense, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, counterproliferation of weapons of mass destruction, humanitarian, like the list goes on and on. So the scope of duty is so vast for Green Berets that you need a very smart, mature, operational soldier to be able to carry all of those things out effectively on behalf of the Department of Defense in America, right? So, yeah, so that's a difference there. When we talk about scope of duty, SEALs compared to SF, it's like you almost can't even compare it because it's so massive on the SF side. It's sort of so linear on the SEAL side, okay? That's just the reality of how these units are used. Now, we're going to get into, when we talk about least useful, right? I should have made it clear, like, least useful, how we're defining that is really in terms of least useful to Special Operations Command and really the America strategically in general, right? Carrying out strategic initiatives. So part of the big problem with becoming less and less useful is when you shit the bed, okay? So unfortunately, the SEALs have done this operationally more than any other unit. It's really not close. I know people want to be like, well, what about the Green Beret team in Africa? Like, you can cite one example, or, oh, what about Black Hawk Down? It's like, okay, yeah, shit happens. But when we're talking about sort of character, leadership, negligence, nothing really compares. And that's been a big hindrance for the SEALs over the last 15 years. Okay, so of course, everybody knows the first one we're going to talk about, and had massive, long-lasting effects on that unit, Operation Red Wings. I'm not going to get into that, or I'm going to circle back to that when we talk about sort of having like the least amount of training that goes into the soldiers and what that can mean when you get in the combat realm here in a second. All right, Task Force Bruiser, that's been a big one over the last couple years with a lot of negative press coming out about it. Okay, I'm not going to get into the people involved, and again, I'm not going to talk about any of the people involved that are SEALs in these. That's not the point of the video. It's just to acknowledge that these were huge fuck ups. Okay, the death of Logan Melgar, this is a huge one. I mean, straight up like killed, murdered a Green Beret. SEALs did. Okay, that's a big long story on its own, but again, massive blow to the special operations community and really the SEALs credibility with that one. All right, abandoning John Chapman, we all know that one as well. Okay, these are just, again, negligence after negligence after negligence after negligence. And when you are talking about carrying out strategic level directives for the United States, you cannot be doing things like this. That's the reality of it. All right, so and let's circle back to Operation Red Wing. Okay, I'm not going to get into he said, she said, but what I will say when we're talking about tactical proficiency, because, you know, Andrew said in there that, you know, they're basically human weapons. Yeah, but also they've also demonstrated to not be as tactically proficient as a lot of the other soft units in cases like this. Okay, so without getting too much into it, the reality is the reporting has come out is basically that there was 8 Taliban who were chasing that 4-man SEAL team up the mountain. And what we never talk about is how 4 special operators on top of a mountain with massive high ground advantage were killed by 8 basically dirt farmers in Afghanistan. Okay, from a tactical perspective, that's a real head scratcher. I wasn't there, I don't know, but I think it's kind of a demonstration of like maybe we're not as well trained as the other special operations units. Okay, where not to be comparative, but I myself was in a near ambush, which basically turned into 4 SF guys in an open field having to assault a defensive fighting position with 10 Taliban basically bunkered inside, and you know, we won that, lost 0. So again, can't compare these things. I wasn't there, but it's kind of a head scratcher of the tactical capabilities that supposedly are the one big thing. Okay, so again, I'm not trying to, you know, shit on guys, but it's the reality of the stories is what it is. All right. I get asked all the time if I'll do a video on Operation Red Wings. Yes, I do know multiple people that were in the region and were involved. Not necessarily, like, obviously not on the ground. Like, one of them were 4 SEALs. That's not what I mean. But in the region from the Special Forces side, and do have a lot of backside knowledge of where that all went wrong from a planning and leadership perspective that I don't think anybody really knows or talks about. So if you guys are interested in that video, okay, maybe I'll do it. All right, put it in the comment section if you want. I know I have a lot of, again, insight into that isn't really out to the public, so I'll consider maybe doing that if you guys are interested. Okay, moving on from that. All right. Yeah, so we went over sort of operational linear scope, massive fuck-ups, sort of. Also, the training is just, again, very linear, not a lot of expansiveness comparatively to other soft units. So let's talk a little bit about extras and what's sort of detracted from the usefulness of the SEALs over the last 20 years. Okay, the biggest one by far is loss in confidence from Special Operations Command. Okay, following all these sort of massive fuck-ups, okay, the reality is, especially Operation Red Wings, their operational scope in Afghanistan became extremely limited, to where in the last 10 years, I don't know, I'd never heard of any SEALs in Afghanistan. Maybe there were some somewhere, but not while I was there. And yeah, the other thing, guys, is because I was in when all this happened, right? All of these things happened. There was massive blowback to the entire Special Operations community, okay, all the units, in that up to the point where at one point Congress called for congressional review and oversight over Special Operations because of how many fuck-ups the SEALs had. I think the final nail in the coffin was, if I remember right, was Logan Melgar being murdered. We dealt with a ton of shit, even in the SF units, in blowback from all of that, okay? So I think part of that is also why you'll see Green Berets be so critical of SEALs a lot of the time is it didn't just affect their unit, it affected us as well and our ability to operate for a pretty long point of time as well. Okay. The next one, and this isn't really like usefulness, but I think it's sort of how we went from the Hollywood image of Navy SEALs to where we are today. And again, guys, the SEALs aren't a bad unit. They're not. Again, when you use them for the purpose that they're designed for, they're very, very good at their job. But Hollywood sort of portrayed them into basically a unit of all Delta Force operators, right? And it's just, obviously we know that's not the case now. Now again, I forgot to do this at the start of the video, but I want to make very, very clear that I am separating DevGru from the regular SEAL teams, okay? I am not, so before you say they killed Osama bin Laden or whatever, like, we're not talking about DevGru. DevGru is a separate organization, and way, way different in their success, okay? Now, social media, I think, has had the biggest effect of sort of peeling the curtain back for everybody to see, because what we've had is guys like Andrew, guys like me, so many special operators now who tell stories that are in the space that can tell you their experiences working with SEAL units and things like Task Force Bruiser, Operation Red Wings, like all of these things have come to light, which have really sort of given a black eye to the SEAL regiment. Okay, it's the reality of what it is. All right, and it's exposed a lot. All right, the last one, I think, and we see this, and this is really the only thing I've been like actually critical of the SEALs personally in most of my videos, and that is sort of the toxic culture, okay? Especially the infighting and attacking of SEALs constantly tearing each other down on podcasts, calling each other war criminals. We've all seen that shit show unfold. Okay, they're constantly at each other's throats. And I saw Chad right over on 307 Project talk about the reason why is because what you're seeing is sort of the projection of an extremely toxic SEAL team culture from the regiment itself, which I think is actually, is probably the best way to think about it. So what I mean by that is when you're talking about usefulness to Special Operations Command or strategic initiatives, when you have such a negative, toxic culture, you're not going to be a successful unit. And that's not just in the military. Those of you might work in really toxic environments at work, and you'll notice your work output, your efficiency, they're all in the toilet because everybody's so miserable dealing with the toxic environment. Okay, so I think that's a big, big factor. Hopefully that's being addressed. From what I've heard is there's a lot of movement in the active duty SEAL regiment to sort of detract away from that. So hopefully, there's a lot of lessons learned because, again, like it is what it is, right? It's also highly, ALSOF is highly competitive, right? A-type personalities, like, so you're gonna have that toxicity sort of naturally inlaid in the special operations community in general. But again, I think they've taken it to the extreme compared to the others. So yeah, guys. So for those of you who ask, I'm not sure which special operations unit to try out for, this will give you a better idea, okay? So if you want to, sort of be a war machine door kicker and, raiding boats and pirates and things like that, yeah, go to the SEAL teams. You're going to have a great time, I think. But if you're a little bit older and you want to, really expand the scope of what you're going to do operationally, then you should consider something like Special Forces instead. So, hope you guys found this one interesting, and, I'm sure I'll get a lot of blowback for this video, even though I don't think I was that unfair or that negative, but we'll find out. So, again, leave it in the comments if you're interested in some follow-on content about maybe Operation Red Wings. Maybe I'll finally, give you guys what you want and do it. All right, guys. Take care.